My adoptive parents only took me in to use me as their daughter's ghost composer while ignoring how cruel she was to me. So, I unleashed their darkest secret and turned the tables in the most devastating way possible. I was 16 when I finally got adopted. My new parents hugged me and promised I would never have to go through anything like that again. And I believed them until I met their biological daughter, Vanessa. We were the same age, same grade, even looked somewhat alike, both with dark hair and lanky builds, though her eyes were ice blue while mine were deep brown. And on the second week of living with the Blackwoods, Vanessa came home and found me improvising on the piano. She stood in the doorway, watching me for a moment before slamming her designer bag onto the floor. "Who said you could touch my piano?" she demanded. I immediately pulled my hands away from the keys. "I'm sorry. I thought it would be okay since no one was using it." "Well, it's not," she snapped, marching over. Then she shoved me so hard I fell off the bench, my elbow cracking against the hardwood floor. "Touch my stuff again, and it'll be worse." I didn't want to tell my new parents and be labeled a troublemaker. So, I just made it very clear I was in pain by wincing whenever I moved my arm. We were sitting at the dinner table when they finally said something. "Elijah." "Richard." "My new father," said, gesturing to my arm. "What happened to you?" Before I could answer, Vanessa spoke for me. "Oh, that was all me," she said with a smirk. "I caught him playing my piano without permission." I waited for the reprimand, for them to tell her that violence wasn't acceptable in their home. Instead, Diane, my new mother, reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "Vanessa has severe creative anxiety that manifests as emotional outbursts," she explained, her voice gentle but her grip tight. "The last foster child couldn't handle it. We had to send him back after Vanessa destroyed his guitar." "But you're different," Richard added quickly. "You're stronger. We could see it in your file. All those homes you survived. You can handle this." "Well, if there's one thing being a foster kid has taught me, it's that you have to stand up for yourself," I said carefully. "I'm not really comfortable with being pushed around." "Elijah," Richard interrupted, his voice dropping. "Remember the situation we took you out of? The group home where 3 older boys put you in the hospital, where no one protected you." Diane chimed in. "It would be a shame for us to have to send you back, wouldn't it?" At that moment, everything became clear. I wasn't their son. I was Vanessa's punching bag with a social security number. The only place I felt normal was in my music classes at Westlake Arts High. Turns out even after everything, I was good at music, like really good. I could compose complex pieces without even trying, and all the teachers were impressed with my natural talent, and I knew if my new parents found out, they'd somehow ruin it. So for months, I let them believe I was struggling, just like their talentless daughter. I was sitting in my room working on a composition when Diane burst in. "Hey," she exclaimed, her smile practically radiating through the house. "Richard and I just got your evaluation from Mr. Chen." "Congratulations." She kissed my forehead, and I tensed up, bracing myself for the worst. "We had no idea you were so talented. Vanessa got a failing grade on her composition project. You want to help her? I could give her some pointers," I offered cautiously. "No. Sorry for raising my voice," she said, composing herself. "I mean, no, not really." There was a long pause before she continued. "You two look so alike. I think it would be best if you wrote her compositions for her. Just swap names." "But that's cheating." I wanted to protest, but then I thought about the group home flashbacks, older kids stealing my food, being beaten for my foster care stipend money, sleeping with one eye open. Even being Vanessa's personal ghost composer was better than going back. So instead, I folded like a wet paper towel. "Of course I'm down," I exclaimed. She left, taking my music folder with her. The system started immediately. Monday morning, 3rd period, I walked into Vanessa's advanced composition class while she took my spot in the beginner's class. The teacher barely glanced up when I wrote, "Vanessa Blackwood," on the assignment. 90 minutes later, I'd created a beautiful piece that would surely earn an A. Meanwhile, Vanessa was deliberately failing in my class, scribbling random notes on Elijah's composition sheet. And despite her grades getting 100 times better, she never stopped tormenting me. She just got more creative. She'd delete parts of my personal compositions right before they were due. She called it maintaining our cover story. The Blackwoods bought her a $3,000 electric keyboard for her improved grades. I got a used music theory book. The worst part was watching teachers praise Vanessa for my work. Mr. Chen pulled her aside after I'd written a haunting piano sonata under her name. "This shows real emotional depth," he said, genuinely moved. "Vanessa, have you considered applying for the Young Composers Fellowship?" She laughed in his face and said, "Classical music is for losers." He thought she was being modest. By sophomore year, Vanessa had discovered the power of her fake success. She'd walk around school like she owned the place, letting everyone know about her musical genius. "Yeah, I used to struggle with composition," she'd tell other students at school concerts. "But then I just decided to tap into my natural talent. Mind over matter, you know." Those words circled in my head like sharks. So much so that for the next composition I wrote under her name, I purposely included some dissonant chords that didn't quite work. Not terrible, just noticeably flawed. But my petty reign of terror was cut short because the day the evaluations came out, Richard dragged me out of bed at 300 a.m. What he did next was something I hadn't experienced since the group home. When I finally gasped out that I'd never do it again, he patted my soaked head like I was a dog who'd learned not to pee on the carpet. "Good boy. Now go make Vanessa's breakfast. She has a recital today." That's when I stopped being angry and started being smart. I realized they'd shown me exactly what they were: criminals who'd torment a child to protect their image, and criminals always make mistakes. I stood in the kitchen making Vanessa's smoothie exactly how she liked it: almond milk, frozen berries, and protein powder, while my mind raced through every threat and humiliation I'd endured. The fresh bruises from last night throbbed under my shirt. I'd need to document them later, but right now I had to play the perfect foster son. My hands moved automatically, measuring ingredients just right, arranging everything on the tray the way Vanessa demanded. The breakfast table felt like a minefield that morning. Diane sat across from me with her coffee, scrolling through her phone with that fake smile plastered on her face. She looked up suddenly, her eyes bright with excitement. "Oh, Elijah, I almost forgot. The National Young Composers Competition is coming up next month." She stirred her coffee casually. "Richard has connections with one of the judges. He's very understanding about Vanessa's special creative process." My stomach dropped. Taking credit for regular school assignments was one thing, but a national competition with prize money and recognition, that was serious fraud, the kind that could destroy my future music career before it even began. I kept my face neutral and nodded, focusing on my cereal. Vanessa reached for the orange juice and her elbow knocked it toward me. The cold liquid splashed across my lap and sheet music I'd been working on. I bit down hard on my tongue, refusing to flinch or show anger as my morning's work dissolved into an orange-stained mess. Vanessa watched me closely, her eyes narrowing when I didn't react. "Careful there, foster boy," she muttered. But I could see the wheels turning in her head. Something had changed in me since that 300 a.m. wake-up call, and she'd noticed. At school, I kept my head down and moved through the hallways like a ghost. My hand still ached from where Richard had twisted it, but I couldn't go to the nurse. Too many questions. I slipped into music theory class just as the bell rang. "Elijah, can I see you for a moment?" Mr. Chen called from his desk. My heart hammered as I approached. He waited until the other students settled into their seats before speaking quietly. "I've noticed some bruising on your wrists, and you've been moving stiffly lately." His dark eyes searched mine with genuine concern. "Is everything okay at home?" The words wanted to spill out so badly, but I thought about the Blackwoods' reputation, their connections in the music industry, the way everyone respected them. Who would believe me? "Just been practicing too long in awkward positions." I lied smoothly. Got a little too focused on a difficult piece. He didn't look convinced but nodded slowly. "My door is always open if you need to talk." During lunch, I sat alone in my usual corner of the cafeteria, picking at my sandwich. Vanessa held court at the popular table, surrounded by her friends, her voice carrying across the room. "Yeah, my parents have connections with Atlantic Records," she bragged. "They're already interested in my original compositions. Good thing I found my voice as a composer, right? Grammy nomination, here I come." Her friends laughed and congratulated her. One of them asked how she'd managed such a dramatic improvement in her music. "Just stop being lazy," Vanessa shrugged. "Turns out I'm actually a musical genius when I apply myself." The sandwich turned to cardboard in my mouth. They weren't just using me for high school. This was their long-term plan, riding my talent all the way to Vanessa's music career. How many years would they keep me trapped? After school, I trudged up to my room, exhausted from maintaining the facade all day. But as soon as I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. My desk drawers were slightly open. Sheet music on my stand had been moved. The air smelled like Deanne's perfume. My composition notebook. I dropped my backpack and rushed to my mattress, lifting the corner where I'd hidden it. Gone. Panic flooded through me as I tore apart my room, checking every hiding spot. That notebook had everything. My original compositions, my documentation of the Blackwoods scheme, dates and times and details. Without thinking, I stormed downstairs to the kitchen. Diane stood at the counter chopping vegetables for dinner. The knife moved in precise, deliberate strokes. "Where is it?" I demanded. She didn't look up. "Where is what, dear?" "My composition notebook." "You took it." The knife paused mid-chop. She turned to face me, still holding it, the blade catching the light. "Privacy is earned, not given. Elijah." Her voice was sweet, but she gripped the knife handle tighter than necessary, bringing it down on a carrot with unnecessary force. "We're a family. Families don't keep secrets." I stared at the knife in her hand, at the way she smiled while holding it. Message received that evening. I found my notebook on my bed. Several pages had been torn out, the ragged edges mocking me. Vanessa's fingerprints were visible on the torn pages, deliberate and taunting. Every entry about the scheme, every documentation of what they'd done, gone. At dinner, Richard made an announcement. "We've decided to upgrade our home security," he said, cutting into his steak. "Cameras throughout the house. For everyone's safety." "Of course. Where exactly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, all the common areas, hallways, exits, that sort of thing," he smiled. "And we'll have monitors in our bedroom so we can keep an eye on things." They were closing every escape route, watching every move. Even my room wouldn't be private anymore, with cameras in the hallway monitoring when I left or entered. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe, my only real friend at school. "Haven't seen you in forever. Want to hang out this weekend?" I stared at the message, realizing how completely the Blackwoods had isolated me. Between Vanessa's strategic torment, the constant composing for her, and their surveillance, I'd lost touch with everyone who might help me. Late that night, I waited until the house was quiet before creeping to the bathroom. I locked the door and pulled out my phone, setting the timer function. In the mirror, I carefully photographed each bruise, each mark Richard and Vanessa had left on me. The camera flash illuminated purple fingerprints on my wrists, welts across my shoulders. I created a folder on my phone and labeled it Vanessa's Music Awards. If they found it, they'd think it was her accolades. The irony wasn't lost on me. The bathroom door handle rattled. I quickly shut off my phone and flushed the toilet, running the sink for cover. Vanessa stood in the hallway when I opened the door, her eyes cold and calculating. "What were you doing in there so long?" she demanded. "Using the bathroom," I said, trying to step past her. She shoved me against the wall, her forearm across my throat. "I know you're planning something, foster boy. I can smell it on you." I met her gaze steadily, not struggling. "I'm not planning anything." She studied my face for a long moment before releasing me. "Good. Because if you try anything, anything at all, you'll wish you were back in that group home getting beaten every night." The next morning, Dean dropped another bomb at breakfast. "What's what? I volunteered to be a parent chaperone for the school music department." She beamed at me. "I'll be there every Tuesday and Thursday, helping with recitals, sitting in on classes. Isn't that wonderful? My safe space, the one place where I could breathe." Gun. She'd be watching me there too, making sure I stayed in line. During study hall, I managed to grab the family iPad while Diane was distracted talking to another parent volunteer. I quickly opened the Messages app, scrolling through old conversations. There it was. Messages from someone named Noah. Dated 8 months ago. "Please help me. I can't take it anymore. Vanessa destroyed my original scores this time. I'm scared." The messages stopped abruptly. The last one reading, "Please don't let them hurt me anymore." Noah, the previous foster kid, the one whose guitar Vanessa had destroyed. But these messages suggested so much worse. In music theory class, Vanessa slipped me a note with her composition requirements. They were impossibly complex, deliberately, so I'd have to work twice as hard while the teacher watched, making it look natural. As I sketched out chord progressions, I felt Mr. Chen's eyes on me, suspicious. Diane had scheduled a parent-teacher conference during my free period, my only unsupervised time at school. Now I'd have to sit there while she discussed Vanessa's remarkable improvement with teachers who praised my work under her name. I tried one more time with the school counselor, choosing my words carefully. "I'm worried about a friend," I said. "They're in a bad situation at home." The counselor, Mrs. Taylor, leaned back in her chair. "What kind of situation?" "Their family expects things from them, makes them do things they're not comfortable with." She frowned. "Are you talking about the Blackwoods? Because they're pillars of this community. Richard has discovered so many musical talents, donated so much to our programs. Whatever you think you're seeing, I'm sure you're misunderstanding." Dead end. Another door closed, but I wasn't giving up. During Vanessa's next composition submission, I took photos of her actual work before swapping our papers. F after F, wrong note after wrong note. Evidence. While organizing Richard's home office as part of my chores, I found a folder marked Foster Care. Inside were documents showing they received Rs. 500 monthly for my musical education. But there was more. Applications for other foster children with notes in the margins. Perfect pitch. Composition potential. Similar appearance to Vanessa. They'd done this before. They were planning to do it again. At Sunday dinner with Vanessa's grandparents, I watched them fawn over their granddaughter's transformation. "We always knew Vanessa had it in her," her grandmother said, patting her hand. "Such a gifted girl. She slipped me a 20 bill when no one was looking. For all your hard work," she whispered. And I realized she knew. Maybe not the details, but she knew something. The pattern was clear now. The Blackwoods specifically requested foster kids who could boost Vanessa's music career. Kids who were vulnerable, who had nowhere else to go. Kids like me and Noah. Riley, Vanessa's former bandmate, approached me after school one day. "It's weird," she said. "Vanessa was always tone deaf when we played together. Could barely keep rhythm. Then suddenly, she's writing these brilliant compositions." I chose my words carefully. "People change." "Not that much," she insisted. "I still have our old band recordings." She couldn't even follow a simple 4/4 beat. Now she's writing complex time signatures and modulations. Something's off. A seed of hope. I suggested maybe something was strange about Vanessa's transformation. Riley's eyes lit up with recognition. "She still can't explain her own compositions," she said. I asked her about the key change in her latest piece, and she went completely blank. Vanessa must have seen us talking because that afternoon in the empty practice room she cornered me. Her fingers found the pressure points on my arm that wouldn't show bruises. Precise strikes that left me gasping. "Stay away from Riley," she hissed. "Or next time will be worse." That evening at dinner, Richard mentioned casually that Riley's father had just lost a major distribution deal with his indie record label. "Such a shame," he said, not looking at me. "These things happen in the music business." The threat was clear. "Cross us and we'll destroy anyone who helps you." Diane started requiring me to attend Vanessa's music showcases as her assistant. The first was a student recital at a local coffee shop. I sat in the corner with sheet music while Vanessa performed, accepting congratulations for her musical genius. Diane introduced me to other parents as Vanessa's charity case, the poor foster kid they'd graciously taken in to mentor. The humiliation burned worse than any bruise. I recognized the psychological torture for what it was. They wanted to break my spirit, make me grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. That night, I started a new composition notebook, this time hidden inside a hollowed-out music theory textbook in my closet. I documented every instance of forced composition, every public humiliation, every strategic placement of me as Vanessa's inferior. 3 days later, Zoe showed up at the house unexpectedly. I was transcribing one of Vanessa's compositions in the living room when the doorbell rang. Diane answered, her smile faltering when she saw who it was. Zoe pushed past her politely but firmly, spotting me on the couch. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. Me surrounded by Vanessa's assignments, the new security cameras mounted in every corner. The way I instinctively shrank when Diane moved. She mouthed something I couldn't catch at first. Then I read her lips clearly. The profanity was obvious even without sound. She'd seen how I acted around the family, the fear I couldn't quite hide. Diane recovered quickly, turning on the charm. She offered Zoe cookies, asked about her family, complimented her violin playing. But as she led her to the kitchen for refreshments, I managed to slip a folded note into her pocket. 4 words scrawled in desperation. Help me. Find Noah. Zoe palmed it smoothly, her face never changing. She stayed for exactly 15 minutes, making small talk while I sweated through Vanessa's string quartet arrangement. When she left, she squeezed my shoulder. Message received. The next morning at school, I created a backup email account using the library computer. The Blackwoods monitored my regular accounts, but they didn't know about this one. I started forwarding myself photos, documenting dates and times, building a case. During lunch, I found a payphone near the gym that still worked. My hands shook as I dialed child services. The hold music played for 30 minutes. 30 minutes of looking over my shoulder, expecting Diane to materialize. Finally, I hung up in frustration. The system that was supposed to protect kids like me was overwhelmed, understaffed, useless. Zoe started texting me that afternoon, but in code. We pretended to discuss a music theory assignment we'd never received. Need help with this chord progression. Meant she was checking if I was in danger. Difficult time signature tonight. Meant the Blackwoods were escalating. Found a new interpretation. Meant she had information. I discovered Vanessa's competition entries in the trash behind the school. All in my handwriting, my compositions, my ideas. The Young Composers Fellowship, the Berklee College competition, Juilliard pre-college. She was aiming high with my brain. I photographed each page before Vanessa showed up and tore them to shreds in the parking lot, watching me the whole time to make sure I didn't keep copies. Riley found me after school, her brother Aiden standing beside her. Aiden was older, maybe 22, with tired eyes and a knowing look. Aiden revealed that he'd gone to school with Noah, the previous foster kid. The Blackwoods had told everyone he'd been sent back to the system for stealing, but Aiden knew better. Noah had run away, terrified. He was working at a music store 2 towns over, still looking over his shoulder. At dinner, I carefully mentioned Noah, watching their reactions. Richard's jaw tightened like a vice. Diane's smile turned plastic. Vanessa smirked knowingly. Richard set down his fork deliberately. His words came out measured, controlled. Some children simply couldn't be helped, he explained. Some were too damaged, too difficult. We tried our best with Noah, but he was ungrateful, dishonest, unstable. The lies rolled off his tongue like water. Diane nodded along, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Vanessa's smirk widened. The National Young Composers competition loomed 2 weeks away. Serious fraud, real consequences. The thought made my hands shake as I cleared the table. Diane noticed and patted my shoulder, her touch making my skin crawl. Through Riley's brother, I tracked down Noah. The meeting happened at Harmony Cafe halfway between towns. He looked smaller than I'd expected, hunched over a cold coffee, flinching whenever the door opened. His hands shook as he told me his story. The Blackwoods had done the same thing to him. Composition theft, music fraud, strategic abuse. But when he tried to refuse the competition scheme, they'd threatened to report him as a thief to every foster agency in the state. No family would take a kid with a theft record. He'd age out on the streets. So he ran, left everything behind, and disappeared. The destroyed guitar Vanessa bragged about. Noah showed me photos he'd kept. His prized possession, a vintage acoustic his birth mother had given him, smashed beyond repair. Vanessa had used a baseball bat. Back at school, cracks started showing in Vanessa's facade. Teachers began noticing the disconnect between her written compositions and performance abilities. Mr. Chen asked her to play a passage from or latest composition. Vanessa went completely blank, mumbling something about needing to review the score. The piano teacher caught her unable to identify basic chord progressions she'd supposedly written. The music theory teacher noticed she couldn't discuss any of the compositional techniques from her papers. Whispers started, questions arose. The Blackwoods made their next move during a family meeting. They offered me a deal. Continue helping Vanessa through music school and they'd pay for my education too. 4 years at any conservatory I wanted, all expenses covered. All I had to do was keep being Vanessa's brain. I saw it for what it was. 4 more years of slavery. 4 more years of bruises and humiliation. 4 more years of watching Vanessa take credit for my music while I lived in her shadow. Teachers started comparing notes in the faculty lounge. Chen remembered similar composition styles from a foster student years ago. The piano teacher recalled another kid who'd suddenly stopped attending. Patterns emerged. Diane's perfect image began to crack. When confronted about the mounting suspicions at a parent-teacher conference, she snarled at me in the parking lot before catching herself. The mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the monster underneath. I discovered more evidence in Richard's home office, tax documents showing they'd claimed me as a dependent while pocketing the foster care money. Musical education expenses they'd never paid. Years of financial fraud documented in their own handwriting. Chen pulled me aside after class one day. He knew something was wrong. He'd started keeping copies of all student compositions, noting the similarities between Vanessa's work and pieces from previous years. He couldn't prove anything yet, but he was building a case. Zoe created a cloud storage account from her house, sharing access through a music sharing app the Blackwoods didn't monitor. When I logged in, my heart stopped. She'd already uploaded gigabytes of evidence I'd smuggled out on flash drives hidden in my instrument case. Photos, documents, recordings, everything. Really chose to help despite her father's warnings. The distribution deal loss. She'd investigated and found it was due to a competitor's better offer, not the Blackwoods' influence. The timing had been coincidental. They'd used it as a threat, but they didn't have the power they pretended to have. Our small network met secretly at Zoe's house. Me, Zoe, Riley, and Aiden. We planned carefully, knowing we had one shot. The evidence was overwhelming, but we needed to present it right. I refused Riley's suggestion to plant fake evidence. We had enough real documentation. We needed to do this clean, do this right, no shortcuts that could backfire. During a heated family argument about competition entries, Vanessa slipped. She mentioned not understanding the modulation she supposedly wrote, catching herself too late. Her parents exchanged panicked looks. I recorded it all on my phone hidden under the table. Noah agreed to provide a sworn statement, though terror still gripped him. His hands shook as he wrote out his experience. Every detail. Every abuse, every forced composition, evidence of a pattern spanning years. Vanessa's bandmates dumped her very publicly in the school cafeteria. They announced to everyone within earshot that she was actually musically illiterate, that she'd been lying about her compositions. The word spread like wildfire. Students started noticing the discrepancies. Social media posts questioned Vanessa's transformation. A hashtag started trending locally. The Blackwoods' carefully constructed image began crumbling. Aiden's friend, a music copyright lawyer, reviewed our evidence. His assessment was clear. Multiple crimes documented: fraud, abuse, tax evasion. The Blackwoods had left a paper trail a mile wide. When confronted about the mounting suspicions, Diane finally broke character completely. She snarled at me in the kitchen, her real face showing. Then she caught herself smoothing her features back into that fake smile. But I'd seen the truth. Teachers who once praised the Blackwoods started distancing themselves. Mr. Chen apologized for not seeing it sooner. He admitted he'd suspected something with Noah, but had no proof. Now he did. The Blackwoods started making mistakes. They forgot to check my backup phone. They missed my evidence gathering. Their perfect system was falling apart as pressure mounted from all sides. Riley's brother revealed the final piece. Noah hadn't just been physically abused. He'd been forced into the exact same composition scheme. He had Blackwood documents showing the pattern refined over years. This wasn't their first victim or their second. This was a system. I made sure Vanessa's younger cousins stayed away from the situation. During tense family gatherings, I distracted them with music, games, and stories. Whatever happened, innocent kids wouldn't be collateral damage. Mr. Chen, the counselor who dismissed me, and 3 other teachers formed an unofficial alliance. They couldn't act officially yet, but they watched out for me, made sure I was never alone with Vanessa, documented everything they saw. Diane tried to charm Zoe's parents, showing up with homemade cookies and compliments, but Zoe had already told them enough. They were polite but distant, not buying her act. The grandparents visited unexpectedly one afternoon. Vanessa was struggling with a simple melody on the piano, and without thinking, I started explaining the concept. Her grandmother's face changed as she watched. The realization dawned slowly but surely. Word spread through the parent network. Something was off about the Blackwood family situation. People started asking questions. Why did Vanessa never practice with friends? Why couldn't she perform her own compositions? Why did her playing abilities not match her written work? During a computer lab session, I used Zoe's login to access our cloud storage. All the evidence compiled into one protected document. Dates, times, photos, recordings, everything organized and ready. The National Young Composers Competition was 48 hours away. Decision time. Let Vanessa submit my work and commit serious fraud or expose everything now. The music festival where the competition finalists would perform expected me to show up as Vanessa's assistant. During a family photo shoot for Vanessa's music school applications, the photographer noticed my bruises. He saw the family dynamic, the way I flinched when Richard moved too quickly. He said nothing, but his eyes spoke volumes. Reality hit hard. Exposing the Blackwoods meant giving up any chance at music school funding. I'd age out of foster care with nothing, no safety net, no support. But continuing meant selling my soul for 4 more years at a school where I'd watch Vanessa take credit for everything I created. At a school assembly about artistic integrity, I stood up during the question period. My voice carried across the auditorium as I asked about composition fraud. What would happen to students who had others write their music? What about competition fraud specifically? Vanessa visibly swayed in her seat. The principal's eyes narrowed as he looked at Vanessa, then at me. The question hung in the air like a bomb. Parents started questioning why Vanessa never practiced with their kids anymore, why she couldn't explain basic concepts from her supposed compositions, why her performance skills didn't match her compositional sophistication. The accumulated evidence created an undeniable pattern. Even the Blackwoods' sterling reputation couldn't overcome the mountain of documentation. Truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Diane made a last, ditch attempt to destroy evidence, but she discovered I'd hidden copies everywhere. A flash drive in her own jewelry box, files on school computers, photos backed up in multiple clouds. She'd taught me to be thorough, and I'd learned well. The Blackwoods planned to send me back immediately. Emergency removal, they called it, claiming I was unstable, dishonest, a danger to their family. But I'd already arranged to stay with Zoe's family. The paperwork was filed. They couldn't touch me. When Richard tried to physically grab me to prevent me from leaving, Zoe's father intervened. He stepped between us, his presence a wall the Blackwoods couldn't cross. Other parents materialized watching, witnesses everywhere. The house of cards was falling. Every lie exposed, every manipulation revealed. The Blackwoods' perfect image shattered like glass, and everyone could see the ugly truth underneath. Vanessa cracked under the mounting pressure during her grandparents' next visit. They'd arrived unannounced again, this time with questions about her competition entry. When they asked her to play a passage from her submitted composition, Vanessa's face went blank. Her grandmother pulled out a printed score, pointing to specific measures. Vanessa stammered, unable to play even the simplest phrases from work she'd supposedly written. The grandmother's eyes moved between Vanessa and me, understanding crystallizing on her face. She folded the score carefully, tucking it into her purse. The grandfather's jaw tightened as he watched his granddaughter struggle with simple follow-up questions about the compositional techniques in the music. That evening, Vanessa cornered me in my room, desperation replacing her usual arrogance. She grabbed my shoulders, shaking me as she demanded I fix this mess. Her grip left new bruises, but her panic showed cracks in the family's foundation. Diane appeared in the doorway, pulling Vanessa away while maintaining her practiced smile for the grandparents downstairs. The next morning brought an emergency family meeting. The grandparents sat across from the Blackwoods while I served coffee. Playing my role, Vanessa's grandfather produced a folder containing years of Vanessa's actual music assignments, pieces her teachers had given directly to the grandparents during elementary school visits. The notation, the skill level, everything contradicted Vanessa's recent musical miracle. Diane attempted damage control, weaving elaborate explanations about special tutoring and late development. But when the grandfather asked Vanessa to identify a simple chord progression on the score in front of her, the truth became undeniable. Vanessa threw her pencil down, finally admitting she'd never written any of the compositions or created any of the arrangements. Her confession poured out in angry bursts, blaming everyone but herself. The grandparents' horror deepened as Vanessa revealed the full scope, the composition swapping, the systematic fraud, the abuse used to maintain control. She even mentioned Noah, describing the guitar destruction incident with disturbing pride. The grandmother's hand covered her mouth as she processed years of deception. Financial documents emerged from the grandfather's briefcase. Bank statements showing regular deposits from the Blackwoods, supposedly for Vanessa's special music coaching. The grandparents had been unknowingly funding the exploitation. The grandfather's hand shook as he spread the papers across the table, calculating how much money had supported this abuse. Diane's mask finally shattered completely. She screamed at Vanessa for ruining everything, for being too musically inept to maintain the lie. Richard grabbed her arm, trying to restore calm, but she shoved him away. Years of careful image management crumbled in minutes. The grandmother stood, announcing they were cutting off all financial support immediately. She tore up documents related to Vanessa's trust fund, the pieces falling like snow onto the kitchen table. The grandfather added that they'd be contacting their lawyer about recovering the money they'd already provided. Child services arrived within hours, alerted by the grandparents. The caseworkers interviewed me separately, documenting injuries and taking photographs. Zoe's family had already filed paperwork to serve as emergency placement. The Blackwoods couldn't object with their laws supporting my removal. School administrators launched an immediate investigation into Vanessa's academic records. Parent complaints had reached critical mass. Teachers submitted evidence they'd been quietly collecting. Chen provided his documented suspicions spanning multiple years and multiple foster children. The community response was swift and decisive. Parents pulled their children from music lessons at the Blackwood home. Neighbors who'd once admired them now whispered in grocery store aisles. The local music society quietly suggested they find somewhere else to volunteer. Richard attempted one final manipulation, creating social media posts painting me as a troubled teen who'd corrupted their daughter. He uploaded carefully edited videos showing moments where I looked aggressive or unstable. The breakfast scene where I'd stood up to them became evidence of my violent tendencies. Zoe responded immediately, posting full context for every edited clip. Security camera footage from their own system showed Vanessa attacking me moments before each aggressive reaction. The backfire was immediate and devastating. Comments flooded in from other foster children who'd lived with the Blackwoods sharing similar experiences. Local parent Facebook groups exploded with discussions. Screenshots of Vanessa's old music theory tests full of wrong answers and poor notation contrasted sharply with her supposed recent compositions. Parents shared stories of Vanessa being unable to help their children with simple music homework, despite her alleged transformation. The school board meeting drew an overflow crowd. Parents demanded answers about how this fraud had continued for years. Teachers testified about their suspicions and the pressure they'd felt to stay quiet. The Blackwoods sat in the back row, their influence evaporating with each testimony. Some community members initially defended the Blackwoods, citing their charity work and music society involvement. But as more evidence emerged, even their staunchest supporters distanced themselves. The family that had once dominated community concerts and school functions became pariahs. Foster care investigators interviewed Noah via video call. His testimony combined with medical records and my documentation revealed a clear pattern of exploitation. Other former foster children came forward describing similar experiences. The Blackwoods foster license was revoked immediately. The grandparents hired forensic accountants to trace financial fraud. Years of tax documents showed the Blackwoods claiming musical education expenses while pocketing foster care payments. The IRS notification arrived shortly after, beginning an audit that would unravel their finances. Vanessa's music school applications were rescinded one by one as admissions offices learned of the fraud. Juilliard's rejection letter arrived first, followed quickly by Berkeley and Oberlin. Her dreams of prestige crumbled with each thin envelope. Faced with mounting evidence and community pressure, the Blackwoods had no choice. They agreed to sign over guardianship to Zoe's family rather than face public hearings. The alternative was a foster care trial that would make every detail public record. Moving day came quickly. I packed my few belongings while the Blackwoods avoided eye contact. Vanessa made one last attempt at intimidation, but her grandparents were there to supervise. Her grandfather physically stepped between us when Vanessa moved too close. Zoe's family welcomed me with genuine warmth. Her parents had prepared a real bedroom, not just a space to exist. That first night, I slept without fear. For the first time in years, no cameras watching, no footsteps in the hallway, no morning torment to dread. The Blackwoods listed their house for sale within a month. The community's judgment made daily life unbearable. Former friends crossed streets to avoid them. Their positions in the local music scene became untenable as parents requested different teachers for their children. Diane made one final attempt at manipulation, filing a complaint claiming I'd stolen her jewelry. But bank records clearly showed they'd stolen from me. Years of foster care payments that never went to my care. The complaint was dismissed, adding another layer to their humiliation. They left town in the middle of the night, moving several states away. Their forwarding address led to a small apartment, a far cry from their previous suburban paradise. Vanessa's expensive keyboard was sold to cover moving expenses. The family that had built everything on image found themselves with nothing but truth. The school board implemented new oversight policies for student compositions. Teachers received training on recognizing exploitation of foster children. What happened to me became a cautionary tale that prompted real change. Scholarship offers arrived from unexpected sources. Music schools that had followed the local scandal wanted to support a student who'd shown such resilience. Mr. Chen wrote recommendation letters that told my real story, not Vanessa's fabricated one. Noah and I stayed in contact, bonding over shared survival. He'd found stable housing and was working toward his music degree at a community college. We became resources for other foster kids, teaching them to recognize exploitation patterns. Our pain transformed into purpose. Zoe's family provided the stability I'd never known. Family dinners meant conversation, not interrogation. Compositions were mine to create, my achievements to claim. They celebrated my acceptance letters with genuine pride. 6 months after leaving the Blackwoods, I stood on a stage wearing a formal suit. My original composition was being performed by the school orchestra. I spoke briefly about resilience and finding your own voice. The audience included my chosen family, Zoe, her parents, Riley and Aiden, Mr. Chen, and the teachers who'd finally acted. Even Vanessa's grandparents attended, their support a form of apology for years of unknowing complicity. Meanwhile, the Blackwoods struggled in their new location. Without their reputation and connections, they were just another family getting by. Vanessa worked retail. Her dreams of easy success shattered. The premium they'd placed on image left them with nothing when that image crumbled. My musical talent, no longer stolen for someone else's benefit, opened doors I'd never imagined. Full scholarships, composition opportunities, a future built on my own merit. The creativity they'd exploited became my path to freedom. The foster care system, while still flawed, implemented better monitoring for talent exploitation. Caseworkers received training on recognizing the signs. Other children would be protected from what I'd endured. Vanessa's grandparents established a scholarship fund for foster children pursuing music education. Their guilt over unknowingly enabling abuse transformed into action. They insisted I help select recipients, ensuring the money went to those who'd earned their achievements. I chose a music school far from that town, but I carried its lessons with me. Trust, once shattered, rebuilt slowly through consistent care from Zoe's family. Therapy helped process trauma that went deeper than physical bruises. My story spread through foster care networks not as gossip, but as guidance. Social workers shared it in training sessions. Foster children learned to document abuse and build support networks. What the Blackwoods did to me became a blueprint for what to watch for and how to escape. Vanessa attempted to contact me once. A rambling message about how I'd ruined her life. I didn't respond. Her inability to take responsibility showed she'd learned nothing. The Blackwoods had created a monster who believed she deserved success without effort. And now she faced reality without their protection. I graduated with honors, my achievements entirely my own. The stage walk felt different when the diploma had my name on work I'd actually done. My first original composition was published under my own name the following year. The dedication page read simply, "For all the ghost composers who never got credit, your music matters." Sometimes I think about the Blackwoods and what they lost. Their reputation, their standing, their comfortable life, all sacrificed on the altar of their daughter's false image. They could have nurtured Vanessa's actual talents, whatever they might have been. Instead, they built a house of cards that collapsed with a single truth. As for me, I no longer compose in the shadows. My music, my real music, fills concert halls now. And when I take a bow, it's my name they're applauding. Not a ghost, but a composer who found his voice.